Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week, Fort William First Nation Chief Peter Collins. Chief Collins is currently serving his 10th term as Chief of the Northern Ontario Ojibwe First Nation on the north shore of Lake Superior, just across the river from the city of Thunder Bay. The longtime chief says this will be his last term, but unlike previous 2-year terms, this will be the first under a new 4-year mandate. There's been many ups and downs during his tenure, including economic wins and land claim settlements. 6 years ago, a bridge that connects Fort William First Nation and the city of Thunder Bay caught fire, cutting off an economic lifeline and creating safety concerns. But after 6 years of legal wrangling, the bridge has reopened, much to the delight of many on both sides of the river. Chief Collins, welcome to the show. Appreciate you doing this for us.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me.
Earlier this year, you were elected to a 10th term as chief. What you say will be your last term. What's behind that?
Oh, what's behind that is I think I've put my years of service in here at Fort William. I'm getting a little tired. Sometimes your mind gets tired and things have an impact on what happens at home. So, 22 years at the end of this term here will be long enough. And I think I've done a lot in our community, and I'll leave behind a legacy when I do leave Fort William.
10 terms does sound like a lot, but they're 2-year terms, except this time around will be a 4-year term. Can you talk a bit about the change?
Well, I think it's it was important to us to change it. We've been going through a cycle with our council for the last several years now and trying to get it to a point where we have our own custom election code, but it just didn't happen. So we fell under the federal mandate, and we went into the Federal Election Act, and hopefully by the end of this term we have our own custom election code. So we put up a template in place, and we're working on our own custom election code to have in place for the next election.
What are you hoping that looks like?
Well, I'm hoping because it's our community's been critical about the tenure, maybe maybe the structure of our council may change. So we have 12 right now, albeit that we lost one over the last couple months. Passed away. But maybe the community will give us a different direction and set back and maybe a cutback on council. Maybe the tenure is not a 4-year tenure. Maybe it's a 3-year tenure. So those are all different things that we're hoping to get through in the next couple of years and have it ready for ratification.
Are you happy to see the switch to 4 years rather than what seems like you're always in election mode?
Well, absolutely. What I've laid down a foundation for economic development. We've hired a team now. We have a team that's going to create long-term goals for our community. And I think as we work on this 4-year tenure, I've advised them that they have 3 years of bricks and mortar on the ground and creating lots of jobs. And that's why when I leave at the end of this tenure, I'm hoping that we have created a lot of workforce, a lot of opportunities for our community.
Obviously, you're already thinking about the end of it all. And when you think back, what do you feel are some of the successes? I mean, you've had 300 million plus in claims, and
you can look at that as some of your successes, but I think the growth in our community has been the major success. Even before our land claims were settled in 2011, we developed our community, and our major accomplishment was the negotiation with Resolute, or Bullwater at the time, and bringing that mill into our community. And we weren't their priority at the time when they announced that this mill would be somewhere in the Thunder Bay region. So we come up with a scheme or a solution that would help bring us to not being the #1 site selection. So that's our major accomplishment under my tenure as a chief. So that's the one I'm most proud of.
Anything that you're hoping to check off before your 4 years?
Absolutely. I have a long-term care building that we have in the works. We've been working with the province over the last couple of years to put the final touches on the agreement with the province, but now we have to work with the federal government. Hopefully the feds give us a little bit of a contribution to help you get this building on the ground. It's roughly a $23 to $25 million project. And what the other side of it is, there's be 100+ long-term sustainable jobs, and that's the important aspect of why we're trying to get this long-term care. It also gives our seniors in our homes come back to where they feel most comfortable in a First Nation setting, and they're in our own setting. I knew I should have set the phone up, but nonetheless, that's my main goal, and create an economic development for the future generations. So.
One of the more controversial issues, I guess, and it is in many communities, and that's cannabis. And you had a shop that was set up here that came down. Can you talk a bit about that decision?
And I got to be careful when I answer that one, because there is a litigation process being brought forward against us. But on the cannabis side of things, our community is still, and we continue to work on that front, consulting them, try to get a feeling whether they want it or they don't want it. So we've have a letter of approval, but for the cannabis license, I mean, there's a few stages yet to go through, but but we're going to go through a consultation process with our community, and if they say yes at the end of the day, then we have that license, or we will have that license, and we'll be the ones that operate it. So there's still some controversy around that issue. I mean, we continue to deal with it, but nonetheless, I mean, we're going to do it properly and make sure our communities 100% support it, or they're not behind it. And then if they're not behind it, then we figure out what do we do with the license that we will eventually get.
You've had some community meetings, a survey on it. What's the sense you're getting from?
Well, right now, I mean, the survey didn't come back with a lot of input to it, so we've intensified the consultation process. Now we're going to more and more in-depth meetings with our community, more door-to-door meetings, and try to get a better input from the community.
Do you see cannabis as a potential economic driver here in the community?
Well, I don't know. Cannabis is cannabis. I mean, the reality of it right now is it's showing some really sustainable numbers and very substantial income from it. So, I mean, will it be sustainable into the future? Well, we'll see, and depending on how much the market gets flooded. We've had a couple of different venues that we can invest in, not in our community, but outside the community. Excuse me, but we're exploring those, and we're going to see where that leads us to, because I think at the end of the day, once it does get on the ground, there's going to be rewards to that, and that's the financial rewards to our community. As they go forward, though, I mean, what does it look like into the future? Nobody can tell us that.
There's not many legalized stores around here. Thunder Bay was awarded one. Do you think you could get the jump on the market with like you say, you had approval recently?
Yeah, no, I don't know if we're going to get the jump on the market. I think everybody's trying to get that jump on the market, and there's still a lot of work. I mean, different venues are still trying to get their licensing, approval to operate a full cannabis grow up, and does anybody get the jump on it? I think the jump's on it all across the country, and everybody's working towards bringing a sustainable opportunity into their community. So we're no different. We'd like to see rewards go into our community if we can.
Chief Collins, we're going to continue the conversation here on Face to Face. We just got to step aside for a quick break. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Fort William First Nation Chief Peter Collins, and it was a real pleasure for us to drive across the James Street Swing Bridge on the way here, a bridge that literally bridges the communities between Thunder Bay and Fort William First Nation. Recently opened. What was that like for you?
Well, I mean, for me, it was exciting. I didn't get the opportunity to be the first one on the bridge, but I had a sister who was the second one, and it was like Christmas time. She calls and screaming and yelling, and the bridge is open and we can travel safely back into our community. And so that's the important part, connecting both communities. And I think that bridge has always been a part of our community since the turn of the century, and it's important and it's integral to our communities.
What's been the impact of its 6-year-long closure?
The impact is, the safety and the impairment, the travel back and forth into our communities. I mean, the loss of life on that highway was very detrimental to our community, and not only our community. There's a few deaths that happened on the highway, and some of them were people that had migrated into our community to work every day. So, you know, those were the impacts, the detrimental impacts, and I think the economy has been hindered, not only on our side but on both sides. And if you talk to the residents of Westwood area, they continue to push us in trying to get this bridge open because it had an impact on their businesses. So, you know, as we go forward, though, I think we continue to strive and be successful. And I think if we can support each other, it'll go a long ways in that venue.
6 years of legal wranglings and other delays. Was there a time when you didn't think it might reopen?
Well, one of the things is I'm determined, and I never give up, and I never give up hope, and that's the mission I was on. I continued to push both the city and the CN to get closure on this, even though, I mean, ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada, and the ruling, you know, we had to wait for a ruling to come from that far away. But nonetheless, I think both the CN and the city had issues, and they were more become a principal issue, and they were trying to determine who's right and wrong. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the financial impacts of both the city, the CN, and Fort William and legal cost, they could have spent that on the bridge back then.
Yeah. There was talk, you know, over those 6 years of going it your own or joining with the city doing a new bridge. Is that something that's still in the works?
Well, I think if you look at the life cycle of what's built today, it's another 75 years. So, I mean, yeah, maybe at some point in time we need to start discussion a new bridge, because I mean I don't think at the end of the 75-year cycle it'll be rebuildable. It'll live its life cycle. So we'll continue having discussion with the city and see if we can come up with a long-term solution. But it's going to take a lot of resources to get a bridge built across that river.
Yeah, talk about concerns over safety, and one of the things that is coming to light is that the fire trucks from Thunder Bay won't be able to make it across the bridge.
So that I guess there was concerns about the weight at one time, but the weight's still there. The capacity of that weight hasn't changed. The width of it may have changed, and the fire trucks have gotten heavier, and the fire trucks have gotten wider. So I started a discussion with CN, one of their senior reps, over the past couple of days, and how do we get our emergency response for, particularly the fire trucks across the bridge. So what our discussion is right now with CN is about building the center lane for emergency response team, or vehicle, sorry. And they're going to look at that in the coming days, in the coming months, so that we can have a solution for that.
I guess related to that is the community looking at having its own volunteer fire services.
But I mean, we have a young man we just brought on board here over the last couple of months, and he's starting to lay out a foundation for our own volunteer fire department. We've had offers of donations of fire trucks now, and hopefully we can get some funding to build an actual location here in Fort William. So it'll help the cause and have a quicker response time. Hopefully we save some homes in our community. We've lost a couple over the past couple of months, so because of the emergency response time. I mean, it is an issue, but we'll continue to deal with it.
We're talking about the CN bridge that caught fire 6 years ago. I was telling you, I still remember that night, but I also remember some of the tensions that it stoked afterwards.
Yeah, and I guess a little bit of history around the taking of land that rightfully belonged to Fort William. One of the largest takings of reserve land for the purpose of rail anywhere in Canada, and how the issue became with the city of Thunder Bay and CN and the battle between them. There was a perpetual agreement, and back in the turn of the century, the city of Fort William then helped expropriate the land of Fort William, 1,600 acres of land that was lost to our community. With that being said, the city of Fort William at the time helped inject money to build a bridge so they have access into both the property that they're looking at and developing the 1,600 acres for a terminus. And there was a fight over economic power back in the turn of the century between Fort William and the city of Port Arthur at the time, and so Fort William was the victim of that battle, and we've lost 1,600 acres of prime real estate, which is now back in the hands of Fort William. But I guess back in the turn of the century, this city also injected $50,000 to help build a bridge. So, $50,000 in 1905 was a lot of money. So that's where the perpetual agreement became an issue in the courts, and that's where the battle was. So that's they stood their ground, and I think former administration before they had left, they have stood their ground to making sure that perpetual agreement would stay intact. And it's a great win for all of us. So.
Getting the bridge rebuilt was definitely a real partnership with the city, but do you recall and were you surprised shortly after when the bridge burnt some of the reaction of the people from Thunder Bay?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it almost tells you that racism is still alive and well in the city of Thunder Bay, and the impacts of that fire and brought out a lot of naysayers, and it just. It's a terrible way to think, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think if you see the folks traveling across that bridge today, they're all excited about utilizing it, and they all missed it. Not only our community, but the folks that travel to work in Fort William every day. We have close to 1,000 members that come from the city to work in Fort William every day. So that access is important to them too. So. The naysayers will say what they have to say, and we kind of look at the other way when they're talking crap. So
there's been some renewed tensions, I guess, between Fort William and portions or people with the city of Thunder Bay. You and your CEO had called for the mayor, Bill Mauro, to step down from the police services board. What was behind that call?
Well, I guess if you look at the findings of Senator Sinclair and Jerry McNeely and the recommendations going forward by both of those reports, and I guess Bill didn't really want to recognize some of those reports, and that's the reason why we've asked for his resignation. Well, but we have put that stuff behind us now, and I had a meeting with Mayor and trying to close that gap again and start building a positive relationship with the mayor of the city right now, because I've advised him that the mayor, as a mayor, and myself as a chief, we've been here forever, your community and our community, and we need to learn how to get past through our differences, and we'll continue to grow if we work together and look at positive things.
There was a time not long ago when there were joint council meetings with Fort William First Nation and the city of Thunder Bay. Are we a ways off from that yet?
Well, I think we're a little bit of ways off. I mean, some of the city councilors want to have it. Our council want to do it, but there's just some pushback from administration on the city side. Well, I think we'll get there again, and things will change over the next little while, and we'll start working together. Like I said, I've talked to Mayor Mauro recently, trying to close that gap between him and I, and hopefully we can build a stronger relationship.
You mentioned the two reports into policing, the Police Services Board, and the systemic racism. What's been the aftermath of that?
Well, there's still a little bit of fallout. If you look at what's going on in the city today, I mean, I think I have the utmost respect for law enforcement, and they try their hardest to keep our community safe. And what I've relayed on to Sylvia Hutt, the chief of police in the city here right now, is that I have the utmost respect for your organization, for your officers, and we have to learn how to build bridges with each other, no pun intended, but on the bridge side of things and relationship side of things, and I think as we go forward, we all have bad apples, or a few bad apples in our organization, so we try not to paint them all with the same brush, and that's the message to her I've given her. So I stand strong with them. I want them to make sure that they have an impact on our community. I mean, if you see what's going on in our city, as of recently, the crime and the infestation of criminal organizations, I think it's imperative that we support our policing organizations. So, what
more would you like to see be done?
Well, I think they're doing as much as they can. There's quite a burden on the structure and on the organization. I would just recently try to help support a task force that both police, city police, OPP, and the Anishinaabe Police and the APS have all put together and trying to help lobby for funds to keep that task force in place to fight the guns and gangs and all the different crap that comes with that.
Our thanks to Chief Peter Collins for joining us this week on the show. Time for another quick break, but stick around. We have a preview of what to expect in the coming weeks. Welcome back to Face to Face. Starting next week, we'll begin a special two-part interview here on the show with the outgoing Chief Executive Officer of APTN, Jean LaRose. Jean has been the CEO of APTN since 2002 and will be leaving the network at the end of 2019. It's been a special year for the network as we celebrated our 20th anniversary. But as you'll see in this preview of the show, when Jean took over as CEO, APTN was on the brink of having the plug pulled.
Well, they certainly were a challenge when I came on board. I really had no idea what the situation was here. It quickly came to realization that we were in a bit of a difficult spot. The first couple of weeks I was here, the bank called me over to let me know that they were about to pull the plug. We were out of money. They kept returning checks because we didn't have the funds to pay for them, and on and on and on. So the challenge was to get the bank to hold off, but then to work with them to find processes and the opportunities for them to regain confidence in the network. So it meant from pretty well day one that the first year we had to cut back a lot of our programming. We had to inform our producers that we couldn't afford any programming in year one. For a lot of them, that was a disastrous decision. Many of them had counted on a renewed license to maintain their business. So all around, it was pretty difficult on a lot of people. But after in the beginning of the second year and a half or so, that's when things started to calm down. We were able to sort of get back into growing the network, growing APTN, but also look at how we were going to expand it and started developing our future strategy. And since then, we haven't looked back.
There were reports at the time from an investigative reporter who now works here, actually, that the company was $6 million in debt or so. The news team didn't know if they were, like you say, going to have jobs. What did it take to turn things around?
Well, as I said, the first thing we had to do was to stop spending. So obviously our biggest expense is programming. We didn't want to cut on the news service because we felt that was an important one. So that meant all programming had to be put on hiatus for a year. It also meant that we had to come to an agreement with the bank on how we were going to repay, what kind of arrangement they demanded from us. We brought in a CFO at the time, Wilfred Blondy. Wilfred was instrumental in helping us on the financial side. He'd worked for other organizations, other Indigenous organizations. His reputation with the bank was quite high. So he was a key player in helping us negotiate with the bank terms and conditions that we could live with, even though they were harsh. We had some pretty severe operational restrictions put on us, but and that assessment was right. We were nearly $6 million in the red, and there was no way we could have continued that way for any length of time.
And that two-part special with Jean LaRose kicks off next week. That's all the time we have for today. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. And this show and past episodes are available as podcasts. You can find those at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast. Thanks for tuning in this week to Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward. We'll see you next time.